The workshop echoed with laughter. A simple woman, her apron still dusted with flour, stood before a broken engine. The young engineer smirked and said, "If you can fix this, I'll eat my hat." No one knew that within minutes, this woman would silence them all and ignite a story no one could forget. Clara Dawson was known in her small town for running a little bakery on Maple Street. Every morning, the sweet scent of freshly baked bread drifted through the air, drawing in children, workers, and even the mayor sometimes. Clara lived a simple life, flour on her hands, warmth in her smile, and not a trace of pride in her nature. But beneath her humble exterior lived a mind sharper than most could imagine. One afternoon, as Clara was delivering a basket of muffins to the mechanic's workshop across the street, she overheard a commotion. A group of workers stood around a massive truck engine, frowning and scratching their heads. At the center was Ethan Cole, a newly arrived engineer from the city, young, stylish, and far too proud of his title. The workers muttered nervously. The engine belonged to a construction company, and every hour it sat idle cost the company money. Ethan folded his arms and laughed. "Relax, gentlemen. Only someone with real brains could fix this." "Certainly not, huh?" He tilted his chin toward Clara, who was quietly setting down her muffins on the counter. The men burst into laughter. One of them added, "Yeah, maybe she can sprinkle flour inside and bake the engine back to life." The laughter rang out like a cruel bell. Clara's cheeks flushed. She could have walked away. She could have let it slide. But something in her heart stirred, a quiet fire that had long been waiting. She stepped forward. "Let me take a look," she said firmly. The room fell silent for a heartbeat before bursting into more laughter. Ethan smirked, shaking his head. "Lady, this isn't a kitchen. This is machinery. Steel, not dough. Bolts, not butter." Clara didn't flinch. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked straight to the truck. The engine was old, its parts weary from years of service. Oil stains marked every inch, and the stench of fuel filled the air. Clara bent over, her eyes scanning the tangled mess of gears and pipes. She touched the side of the block, listening to the faint clink of loose metal inside. "Him," she murmured, half to herself. The men exchanged amused glances. Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, enjoying the spectacle. "You're wasting your time. If I can't fix it, you can't either." But Clara wasn't listening. She remembered her late father, a railway mechanic who used to let her watch as he worked on train engines. "Every machine breathes like a man," he had once told her. "Find where the breath stops, and you'll find the problem." Her fingers traced along the side until she found a loose nut barely hanging on. With a firm twist, she secured it. Then she pulled out a small tin from her basket. Not flour, not sugar, but a dab of vegetable oil she often carried for baking. Without hesitation, she dabbed it onto the stiff gears. The men snorted in disbelief. "She's seasoning it," one of them whispered. Clara straightened. "Try it now," she said calmly. Ethan rolled his eyes but motioned for one of the workers to turn the ignition. The engine groaned at first, sputtering like an old man coughing, then suddenly roared to life with a thunderous growl. The workshop froze. The workers' jaws dropped. The once lifeless engine now purred with renewed strength, its rhythm steady and strong. Clara simply folded her arms and gave a small, knowing smile. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, the laughter faded into stunned silence. Ethan's smirk faltered. His confident posture crumbled. That's not possible," he muttered. But it was. The men who had mocked her now stared with wide eyes. One of them whispered, "She actually did it." Another muttered, "I've never seen that engine run so smooth." Clara dusted her hands, leaving faint marks of flour on her apron. "Machines aren't so different from people," she said softly. "You just have to listen to what they need." The workers, still in shock, began murmuring to one another. Respect, a thing Clara had never sought, suddenly filled their eyes. But Ethan, he couldn't accept it. He forced a laugh, though his voice cracked. "Beginner's luck. Don't think this means anything. Anyone could have tightened that bolt." Yet deep down, he knew. Clara Dawson had humiliated him, not by boasting, not by arguing, but by simply doing what he, with all his pride, could not. And though Clara walked out of the workshop quietly, basket in hand, she had unknowingly set something in motion. Something that would ripple through the entire town, and far beyond. Because this was only the beginning. The next morning, Maple Street buzzed with rumors. Word spread faster than the smell of Clara Dawson's freshly baked pies. "They say she fixed that old truck engine," Mrs. Henderson whispered to her neighbor as they bought bread. Impossible, the neighbor replied, though her wide eyes betrayed doubt. She's just a baker. But the story grew with every retelling. By noon, Clara's bakery was unusually crowded, not just with customers craving her cinnamon rolls, but with curious faces wanting to peek at the woman who had embarrassed a trained engineer. Clara kept her head down, kneading dough with quiet precision, pretending not to notice the stares. She had no intention of becoming a spectacle. To her, it had been nothing, a loose nut, a stiff gear, a memory from her father's lessons. But to the town, it was a miracle. Across the street, Ethan Cole sat in his office at the workshop, fuming. The laughter of the men still rang in his ears, except this time, they hadn't been laughing with him, they had been laughing at him. He slammed his fist on the desk. A fluke, he muttered. She can't possibly know anything about engines. But a seed of doubt gnawed at him. How had she known exactly where to look? How had she brought the machine back to life so effortlessly? His pride refused to let him accept it. And yet, the humiliation was too sharp to ignore. Ethan decided then and there that he would expose Clara Dawson, prove to the town that she was nothing more than a lucky baker with no real skill. Late that evening, as Clara was sweeping the bakery floor, the door creaked open. Standing there was Mr. Grayson, the foreman of the construction company whose truck she had fixed. "Miss Dawson," he said, removing his hat respectfully. "I owe you thanks. That truck was vital for our work. You saved us a fortune in delays." Clara smiled politely. "It was nothing, sir. I just noticed what was wrong." But Mr. Grayson studied her closely. "Not many people could notice that. You've got an eye, an instinct. Ever worked with machines before?" Clara hesitated, her broom pausing mid-sweep. "My father was a railway mechanic. I used to watch him when I was little. That's all." Mr. Grayson nodded thoughtfully. "Well, if you ever grow tired of baking, there's always a place for someone like you in my team." Before Clara could reply, he tipped his hat and left, leaving her with a strange flutter in her chest. A place in his team. That was absurd. She was a baker. Baking was her life. And yet, her mind wouldn't stop replaying the sight of that engine roaring back to life under her hands. The very next day, Ethan set his plan into motion. A customer's car, an old sedan with a nasty knocking sound, was pushed into the workshop. Instead of fixing it himself, Ethan crossed the street, smirking as he stepped into Clara's bakery. "Morning, Miss Dawson," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "We've got another sick patient across the road. Since you're the town's new miracle worker, perhaps you'd like to try your magic again." The bakery went silent. Customers froze, eyes darting between Clara and the smug engineer. Clara tightened her grip on the wooden spoon she was holding. She could see it in his eyes. This wasn't a request. It was a trap. If she failed in front of everyone, the laughter would return, louder than before. But walking away would mean accepting the insult. Clara set down the spoon and untied her apron. "Lead the way," she said. Gasps rippled through the bakery. Ethan's smirk widened as he escorted her out. The crowd followed, spilling into the workshop like curious school children. The sedan sat in the middle, hood open, the smell of gasoline heavy in the air. Ethan gestured grandly. "Here it is, Miss Dawson. Let's see what you can do." Clara stepped forward, ignoring the murmurs around her. She leaned over the engine, listening carefully. A faint knocking sound echoed like a heartbeat out of rhythm. She closed her eyes, shutting out the noise of the crowd, and let memory guide her. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Engines speak in knocks and whispers. Find the whisper behind the knock. She checked the spark plugs, then the timing belt. Nothing unusual. But when she touched the fuel line, she felt the faintest vibration, uneven and strained. She followed it down to the fuel pump, loose, rattling against its casing. "That's it," she whispered. With steady hands, she tightened the bolts, adjusted the connection, and tapped the pump gently back into place. "Try it now," she said. The ignition turned. The knocking vanished. The sedan purred like a satisfied cat. The workshop erupted in gasps and cheers. "She did it again," one man shouted. "Incredible," another added. Clara stepped back, brushing her hands together. Her heart pounded, but her face remained calm. Ethan's smirk had vanished. His cheeks burned red as he stammered. It was a simple fix. Anyone could have seen it. But the crowd wasn't listening to him anymore. They were watching Clara. Admiration shone in their eyes, the kind usually reserved for experts, not bakers. A boy tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mama, she's like a mechanic wizard." Clara felt her cheeks warm. She wasn't used to attention, let alone praise. But there it was, wrapping around her like sunlight after a storm. And in that moment, she realized something terrifying yet thrilling. This wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. By the third morning, Clara Dawson had become more than just the town's baker. She had become a story. At the market, women spoke of her with hushed awe. At the tavern, men retold the tale of the simple woman who fixed what the engineer could not. Even children sang rhymes, running through the streets with flour on their hands, pretending to fix wooden cats as if they were great machines. Clara, however, wanted none of it. She kept her head low, apron tied, hands in dough as if nothing had changed. But every knock on the bakery door, every customer who stared too long, reminded her that something had indeed changed. The quiet life she had always known was slipping away. Across the street, Ethan Cole sat brooding in his workshop. His workers no longer looked at him the same way. Every time Clara's name was spoken, their eyes shifted, their lips twitched as though they were suppressing laughter. The humiliation gnawed at him. How could a baker, of all people, undermine me? He had spent years training in the city, studying machines, earning his title as engineer. And yet, in a matter of days, this woman had stolen his authority. He couldn't allow it. Ethan's jaw tightened as he stared at the empty workshop. If the town believes she's special, I'll prove she's a fraud. I'll drag her down myself. That evening, as Clara was sweeping the bakery floor, the doorbell jingled softly. A man stepped inside, tall and weathered, his clothes covered in dust from the road. His name was Samuel Briggs, a farmer from the outskirts of town. "Miss Dawson," he said, removing his cap respectfully. "I've heard what you did with the truck and the car. I need your help." Clara frowned, setting the broom aside. "I'm not a mechanic, Mr. Briggs." "Maybe not," he said, "but my tractor broke down in the middle of harvest. If I don't fix it soon, my whole crop will be lost. No one else can figure it out, but I believe you can." Clara hesitated. She could still feel the weight of eyes, the whispers that followed her. But Samuel's voice carried desperation, and she remembered her father's words. A machine isn't just steel, it carries people's lives with it. Finally, she nodded. "Show me." At dusk, Clara arrived at the Briggs farm. The tractor stood in the field, its engine lifeless, the smell of fuel heavy in the air. Samuel's children peeked from the porch, their eyes wide with hope. Clara climbed onto the machine, her hands brushing the cold metal. She listened carefully as Samuel cranked the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, then fell silent again. She closed her eyes, tuning out the chirping crickets, the anxious shuffling behind her. Engines breathe like men, she told herself. Find the whisper behind the silence. Her fingers traced the fuel line, then the valves. Something felt wrong, too tight, choked. She loosened the line, cleared a blockage with a thin wire Samuel brought her, then adjusted the intake valve. "Try again," she said quietly. Samuel turned the key. The tractor rumbled, groaned, then suddenly roared to life, steady and strong. The headlights blazed in the twilight. The children cheered. Samuel's eyes filled with relief. "You've saved us, Miss Dawson. You've saved the harvest." The next morning, the story of the farmer's tractor spread across town. Clara wasn't just the baker who fixed a truck. She was the woman people now turned to when all else failed. But not everyone was cheering. Ethan Cole watched from the shadows of his workshop, his fists clenched tight. Each new success of Clara's carved deeper into his pride. He could feel his authority slipping through his fingers like sand. "This ends now," he muttered. And in that dark moment, Ethan began to plan something dangerous, something that would not only test Clara's skill but also her courage. The town of Willow Creek was no longer the same. Wherever Clara Dawson walked, heads turned. Shopkeepers greeted her with extra warmth. Children followed her, tugging at her apron and asking, "Miss Clara, can you fix my toy car too?" But Clara herself felt uneasy. She had not sought fame. She had not asked to be anyone's miracle. And yet, with each machine she revived, the whispers grew louder. She's gifted. She's special. She's not just a baker anymore. In the dim light of his workshop, Ethan Cole sat surrounded by tools scattered like discarded weapons. He had been drinking heavily, the bitter taste of humiliation burning down his throat. His mind replayed every cheer, every clap, every time the town compared him, the trained engineer, to her. "She's making a fool of me," he snarled. "A woman with flour on her hands, acting like she understands machines better than me." His workers kept their distance, sensing the storm building inside him. But Ethan wasn't only angry, He was desperate. And desperate men are dangerous. 2 days later, Ethan announced a town-wide event. He sent word through posters nailed to walls, through men shouting in the square. Grand Mechanics Challenge, see the baker's true skill. The entire town buzzed with excitement. A challenge between Ethan Cole and Clara Dawson? It was unthinkable and irresistible. Clara first heard of it when Mrs. Henderson rushed into her bakery, waving a poster. "They are calling you out, Clara," she gasped. "The whole town will be there." Clara froze, the loaf in her hands trembling. A public challenge, in front of everyone. She had never sought the spotlight, never wanted to prove anything. But backing down now would mean surrendering to Ethan's mockery. She took a deep breath. If it's what he wants, then I'll face it. The town square overflowed with people. Farmers, shopkeepers, children, even the mayor, all gathered around 2 large platforms where 2 broken machines had been dragged in. On one side, an ancient steam engine, rusted and stubborn. On the other, a complex city automobile with layers of polished steel. Ethan strutted across the square, wearing a confident smile, though his eyes burned with malice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, his voice carrying over the crowd, "today we separate truth from luck. Today we find out if our baker is really a mechanic, or just a fraud who stumbled twice by chance." The crowd murmured. Some whispered encouragement for Clara. Others doubted. But everyone waited for her answer. Clara stepped onto the platform, apron tied at her waist, her face calm but her hands cold with nerves. She looked at Ethan, then at the machines. "I never asked for this," she said clearly. "But if it will silence your doubts, then I accept." The crowd erupted in cheers. A bell rang, marking the start. Ethan rushed to the automobile, his hands moving fast, tools clanging. He looked confident, smirking at every move he made. Clara, however, walked slowly around the steam engine, her fingers brushing its surface. She listened, really listened, to the silent giant. Rust crumbled under her touch. She leaned close, inhaling the faint scent of oil and coal dust. "Machines breathe like men," her father's voice whispered in her memory. "Find where the breath stops." She placed her ear near the piston chamber, then tapped gently with a wrench. Hollow. Something was stuck inside. While Ethan's hands flew noisily, Clara worked steadily. She unscrewed a panel, removed a clogged valve, and carefully cleaned it. Her movements were not rushed, but precise. The crowd leaned in, whispers rippling like wind in wheat fields. "Look at her. She's not panicking. She's listening to it." Across the square, Ethan was growing frantic. Sweat poured down his forehead as he realized the car's problem was deeper than he thought. He yanked wires, twisted bolts, but the more he worked, the less sense it made. He glanced up at Clara, who was calmly adjusting the steam engine with steady hands. The crowd's attention was shifting, away from him, toward her. "No," he hissed. "I won't let her win." Clara tightened the last bolt, then wiped her hands on her apron. She stepped back and nodded. "Start it," she said. Samuel Briggs, standing nearby, pulled the lever. The steam engine coughed, wheezed, then with a thunderous roar, it came to life. The sound echoed through the square, deep and steady, like the heartbeat of a giant awakening. The crowd gasped, then erupted into wild applause. Children clapped, women cheered, men shouted her name. "Clara! Clara! Clara!" Her cheeks flushed, but her eyes remained steady. She had not come for applause. She had come to prove the truth, that machines, like people, only needed someone who listened. But across the platform, Ethan's car still lay silent. His hands trembled. He had failed, again. And in that moment of desperation, something dangerous flickered in his eyes. A thought that went beyond rivalry, beyond pride. "If I cannot beat her, I will destroy her." The cheers for Clara echoed through the square, but in the shadows of Ethan's clenched jaw, a darker game had just begun. Willow Creek had not slept easy after the grand challenge. 4 days, people spoke of nothing else but Clara Dawson, the baker who had revived a dead steam engine before the eyes of hundreds. Children reenacted the moment in the dusty streets. Old men at the tavern compared her to legends. Women whispered about her calmness, her courage. But somewhere in the shadows of the town, Ethan Cole sat hunched over a desk lit only by a sputtering lamp. His pride was not merely wounded, it was shattered. He scribbled furiously in his notebook, muttering, "She humiliated me, in front of them all. They cheered her name. Mine will not be forgotten. No, if she won't step down, she'll be buried under the weight of her own pride." And thus began Ethan's most dangerous plan yet. One crisp morning, a messenger appeared at Clara's bakery with a sealed letter. Clara opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was Ethan's handwriting. One last challenge. At the old foundry, 3 nights from now. If you truly believe machines speak to you, prove it. Or admit you've fooled us all. Clara read the words again and again. She had no desire to compete with Ethan, but the letter made one thing clear. If she refused, he would brand her a fraud. Mrs. Henderson, her closest friend, begged her not to go. Clara, the foundry is dangerous. What if this is a trap? Clara's eyes fell to the flour dust still on her apron. She remembered the cheers of the townsfolk, the hope in children's eyes when they looked at her. Backing down now meant betraying not only herself, but everyone who had begun to believe that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. I must go, Clara said quietly. The night of the challenge arrived. The old foundry loomed at the edge of town, its towering smokestacks silhouetted against the moon. Inside, the vast hall was filled with townsfolk, lanterns casting long shadows on the walls. At the center stood 2 machines. A massive industrial engine, abandoned for decades, its gears rusted and pipes tangled like the veins of a dying beast. And beside it, a sleek, experimental contraption brought from the city. It was a prototype, untested, and far more advanced than anything Clara had seen. The mayor announced, "Tonight, skill will be tested one final time. If Miss Clara succeeds, she will be honored as Willow Creek's master mechanic. If she fails, her claims end here." The crowd murmured. Ethan stepped forward, his face wearing a mask of confidence, though his eyes glimmered with malice. "Do you accept, Baker?" he sneered. Clara raised her chin. "I accept." The challenge began. Ethan immediately lunged at the prototype, twisting tools and barking instructions to his assistants. Sparks flew as he forced the machine into movement. Clara approached the industrial engine. Its size dwarfed her. She placed her palm on its corroded surface, closing her eyes. The crowd grew restless. Why wasn't she starting yet? Suddenly, Clara's eyes widened. Something was wrong. The valves were cracked, the boiler dangerously unstable. If she tried to repair it without caution, the engine could explode. And then it struck her. Ethan had chosen this machine deliberately. He hadn't set a challenge. He had set a death trap. Her heart pounded. If she walked away, the town would think she was afraid. If she stayed, she risked her life. But Clara Dawson had never been one to step back. She climbed the engine slowly, lantern light flickering across her face. She whispered, as if speaking to the machine itself, "You've been silent too long. Tell me where it hurts." She tapped pipes, listened to echoes, traced her fingers along hidden joints. The crowd watched in complete silence, not understanding but sensing something sacred in her movements. At last, she found the blockage, a collapsed piston chamber, clogged with years of soot. It wasn't beyond repair, but the repair was dangerous. One wrong move, and the boiler could ignite. "Clara, stop." Samuel Briggs called from the crowd. "It's too risky." But Clara only shook her head. Machines are like people. They only break when they are neglected. They only fail when no one cares to listen. Her hands worked steadily, unscrewing bolts, cleaning the chamber, row-lining the valves. Sweat trickled down her forehead, but her movements never faltered. Meanwhile, Ethan grew frantic. The prototype resisted him, sparks shooting violently. He cursed, ripped out wires, forced parts together that didn't fit. His assistants backed away in fear. "Work, you stupid machine," he shouted, slamming his fist against it. But the machine remained cold. When he looked up, he saw Clara, calm, steady, her hands moving like a symphony. And then the sound reached his ears, a low hum, a vibration from the engine she was reviving. "No," he whispered. "Not again." Clara tightened the last bolt, then stepped back, her chest rising and falling with exhaustion. "Now," she whispered, "breathe again." She pulled the lever. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then, with a deafening roar, the industrial engine came alive. Steam hissed, gears turned, pistons pumped. The entire foundry trembled as the forgotten giant shook off decades of silence. The crowd gasped, then erupted into thunderous applause. Men tossed their hats into the air, women wept, children cheered her name. "Clara! Clara! Clara!" She stood there, illuminated by firelight and steam, no longer just a baker but something far greater. But Ethan wasn't finished. His face twisted with rage. He staggered toward the machine Clara had revived. In his hands glinted a wrench. "If I can't win," he shouted, then no one will. Gasps filled the hall as he swung the wrench toward a valve, aiming to sabotage the engine and cause an explosion. "Ethan, no," the mayor cried. But before the blow could fall, Clara caught his arm. Her grip was firm, her eyes blazing. "Machines don't betray us, Ethan," she said, her voice ringing across the hall. "It's people who betray themselves." Ethan froze, trembling under her gaze. The wrench clattered to the ground. His knees gave way, and he collapsed, defeated not by her strength, but by her truth. The townsfolk surged forward, lifting Clara onto their shoulders. Lanterns swung high, steam hissed like applause, and the foundry echoed with chants of her name. From that day forward, Clara was no longer just the baker. She became the town's engineer, teacher, and symbol of hope. Children studied machines under her guidance. Farmers brought her broken tools, and she repaired them with the same love she once gave to bread. And though she continued to bake, because bread, like machines, was life itself, people now came not just for her loaves, but for her wisdom. Ethan's fate. Ethan Cole, disgraced, left Willow Creek weeks later. Some said he wandered to the city, chasing a redemption that never came. Others whispered he was last seen drinking alone by the railway tracks. But his name was never spoken with pride again. Years later, Clara was asked by a young girl, "Miss Clara, how did you always know what was wrong with the machines?" Clara smiled softly, dusting flour from her hands. "Because machines are like people. They break when they are ignored. But if you listen closely, really listen, you'll hear their heart. And once you hear it, you can always make it beat again." The girl's eyes widened with wonder. And so Clara Dawson's legacy lived on, not just in engines or ovens, but in every soul who believed that greatness could be found in the simplest of hands.